This conference will now be recorded.
Hi everyone, it's Dr. Ludgate here from Full Sail University, and I just got done talking to you about gaming and gamification and game-based learning and what it is and isn't. And I have the pleasure of answering a couple questions that you might have related to the material that was just addressed. So, do we have a first question?
Yes. Hi, Holly. Carol here. Thank you. First, I just really want to thank you for helping us in this initiative. It's great to have support to be able to communicate with teachers here and share a little bit about what we believe and what we practice at Full Sail. So thank you so much.
Thank you.
I also want to share with the group that's here that in June this year, we actually took a group of educators to visit the campus and have some face-to-face sessions with you about gamification and with other instructors about other topics. And I also wanted to share with you that some of the teachers that we have here in the audience today actually work in the school where these educators that were in the campus with us worked. So it's really great. I feel like we're rounding up to, finalizing a cycle. Thank you again very much for being here with us. So we did ask some of the teachers that enrolled to participate in the training, what would be the questions that they would have, and I have 4 questions to ask you. And then hopefully by the end of this session, everyone here in the audience will be able, if they want to, they will be able to submit a question that I will later send to you. Okay?
Great. Sounds good.
So the first question for you is, have you ever had a bad experience with gamification? And if so, could you share about it with us?
Sure. Yeah, nothing is perfect, right? Especially when you're first trying it out. I think one of the experiences that I remember the most that really did not work out well when trying to do gamification in the classroom. I was working in an 8th grade classroom at the time, and we were doing a lot of reading strategy. And I thought, wow, this would be a great way for me to incorporate games and think about ways that I can bring some of the gamification elements into my class, because I thought, oh, all kids love games. So I brought it into my 8th grade classroom, and I took a lesson that we typically were learning in a very different fashion. It wasn't gamified, and it was a lot of new material. And I found that when I started incorporating some of these game elements, when it was experience points, when I was bringing things a bit more digital, when we originally were doing a lot more analog, students had a really hard time with that transition. I found that when introducing a lot of concepts and material that needed more direct instruction and they needed a lot more face time with me to ask questions, it didn't give them that. And because of that, they were not able to retain the same amount of information from a previous lesson where they got a lot more out of it. So I actually had to go back and teach them and do a bit more direct instruction. So I think that's something that I always look to the educator to say, where are you at within how you're teaching this lesson typically? And do you feel that this makes sense? Do you feel like you need face-to-face time with them, or do you feel like they've got enough of a grasp of the concept that they can go in digitally and do something that has gaming elements within it? So I always look to trust the educator to know when gamification makes sense, and don't jump in completely head first, because sometimes students need, maybe you just do experience points to start, or maybe you just have it to where you have some sort of leaderboard to see how students are doing on a specific activity or a specific topic within your class, instead of saying, okay, we're going to add a leaderboard and we're going to do experience points and we're going to make sure everything is on the computer or on a specific type of device. So I think that experience for me taught me a lot about being a bit more cautious about how much I started out with, and me not knowing a lot of the time about how to go about integrating gamification elements also was something I needed to do a little bit more research on. So that was one of those great learning experiences for me.
Thank you so much for sharing with us. In your presentation, you mentioned the difference of just using a game and actually gamifying a class. Could you give us a little bit more of examples or go a little deeper into that topic of the difference of just bringing a game and using a game and really gamifying the whole class?
Sure. So they are definitely two different things. So when you bring a game into the class, it could be that to get kids excited about some of the new rules, you may say, okay, well, we're going to start out by the example I started with in the presentation, tic-tac-toe. And so you have the kids working, with another partner, and they're doing the X's and the O's. That's just bringing a game in the class. Or it could be a different type of game. Maybe it's the game of life, and you're getting ready to introduce concepts of how to do money management or how to do rules of play with taking turns. Gamifying a class or gamification within your class is actually you looking at, okay, so here are my lessons that I'm looking at. This lesson seems like it could weave in some gamification elements, such as experience points, such as collaboration with teams to finish first from point A to point B. And you actually take that time and build in those elements to learning. It could be the strategy guides, which I talked about earlier. So you're not necessarily bringing a full game in, you're just bringing some of the elements that the kids might see when they're playing games. So like I said, the strategy guides, the experience points, some of those things that are part of a game, but they are not the entire game. And so figuring out what makes sense for what you're about to teach.
I get it. Moving now to some more, like we can see you're passionate about gamification. Do you think there is a risk of like overusing gamification, gamifying too much and maybe losing control of the activity or losing control on the students?
That's a good question. And I actually do encounter that question more often because I think that one of the challenges when first thinking about gamification and gamifying and games is we've always looked at games as play, and it's kind of been just fun, frivolous. But as today we talked about, and you may be seeing more and more, games do have a lot of powerful elements for students to learn. They've got a lot of wonderful elements to help them grasp concepts, put them in the flow state. But I always lean on the educator to know when is too much. I will say that if you are gamifying every lesson, it's probably too much, especially in the beginning. You don't, like I said, you don't want to jump in head first. You may want to dip your toe in the water, putting some of the gamification elements in, strategy guides, experience points, different things like that, and then build up to having more pieces in it. But taking your entire curriculum and gamifying everything, that's a lot to tackle, and not necessarily just for your students, because I think that does take a toll on when, it completely changes how they've learned in the past, most likely. But it also is very stressful for you. If you haven't done this before and you gamify everything, it could feel very overwhelming, because sometimes within gaming and gamification, you are waiting a bit. You don't maybe have those exact reactions with students to be able to say, oh, I realize that student is not grasping that concept because I can't see that light bulb went off, right? So there are specific elements that you as a teacher can recognize that you may not necessarily get when you gamify something. So it is, I would say that is definitely a risk, and I would discourage anybody to just take their curriculum and gamify everything, because that is a lot of planning and work, and it's nerve-wracking. So yes, absolutely, there's some risk to that.
Thank you. And the final question is there a situation in which you would recommend a teacher to actually avoid gamification?
Yeah, that's a good question. When I want to connect with a student, maybe you're working on an activity where you're trying to get out of them a powerful story. You're trying to get them to really break through because maybe they've been holding back. I sometimes feel like you need that one-on-one interaction with the child. And so typically I will lean into having more either direct instruction or one-on-one instruction versus gamification, because they're having one-on-one with whatever game elements that you've put in. They're not having that with you. So I think that that would be a good example of refraining from that. Also, if you have a lot of behavior problems, maybe with a student, sometimes games can help, right? But it could just mask the problem. And if you really need to tend to that, it may be that you need to work more one-on-one with that student. So I think it's really kind of knowing where your students are at. And if you see that gaming is not, or gamification is not really a good strategy at this time, trying to fit it in, it may not be your smartest way to go about getting the material or the objectives met. Trusting your intuition and gut. And also, something I really haven't mentioned before is play the game first yourself, or go through those gaming elements yourself. So you're comfortable with it. You're not going to know everything. The students are probably going to know more than you are with the gaming elements and how they go about earning experience points or using the guides or using the maps that you maybe have created. But at least be familiar enough to be that guide on the side. I think that's really important. But then also being able to step back and say, all right, I'm the expert here. I'm the educator. This does not make sense because this is really sensitive material. That I think that a student, if you're talking about bullying or if you're talking about something that can really hit home for a student and you want to be there for them, you're probably not going to want to do a lot of gaming elements within that. If you have to, because it's something that's mandated by a district, follow it up with some one-on-one or direct instruction interaction.
Thank you so much. It was great having you with us, and it's great to have access to all this information. We're very, very thankful that you're helping us with this initiative, Holly.
Thank you. It's been an absolute pleasure, and I look forward to potentially more.
Hope to see you soon in Brazil, maybe next year.
That would be awesome. I'd love that.
Thank you, Holly.
Thanks. Bye, everyone.
Bye.